With us tonight, a fragile peace across the Middle East. That's to say Israel and Iran have stopped shelling each other. Iran declaring an end to what it described as 12 days of imposed war. Israel says it'll now refocus its military action on the Gaza Strip. We'll have more on that later. The US President Donald Trump is declaring the ceasefire, or rather declared the ceasefire Tuesday, 5 a.m. GMT. Israel confirmed that it agreed at 6 a.m. and Iran had indicated that it would respect a ceasefire if and when Israel stopped bombing them. But just 2 hours later, Israel's military said it detected missiles coming at them from Iran. So Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered a resumption of strikes on the Iranians, condemning what he called a complete violation of the truce. This Wednesday evening, both Israel and Iran, as far as we know, signalling an end to the bombing. The damage has been done. It all started June the 13th, a Friday. Let's bring in now for more analysis of the wider implications of this story from Lancaster University in northwestern England. Simon Mabon joins us, Professor of International Politics and Middle East Studies. Simon, good evening to you. How do you read the situation right now?
I think it's precarious. I think it's slightly less worrying than it has been over the past 12 days or so. But I do think that for now, this is just a bit of a band-aid. It doesn't resolve any of the substantive issues that have caused this friction, caused these points of difference between Israel and Iran, and indeed between the United States and Iran. And some Iranian news outlets are already reporting that there are drones flying over parts of Iran right now that have mobilized air defenses. So it is a precarious moment, but for the minute, the conflict appears to have been paused.
Conflict paused, but Iran and the US, of course, have been at loggerheads since 1979 and the overthrow of the Shah.
Yes.
Of course, it has all developed and it's all well documented, the events have happened since then, and Israel becoming a kind of bulwark, a kind of barrier supported by the US against what is seen as Iran's attempts to push towards the Mediterranean Sea. Iran, of course, with its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, all there ready to threaten. It is, as you say, very precarious. So many different things could go wrong here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I must pull you back further into history, if I may, to 1953
Please.
and an American British-led coup d'etat that toppled the region's first democratically elected prime minister, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. So there's a real deep, entrenched anger, concern, suspicion at the United States by virtue of its actions in 1953, by virtue of what happened in 1979, and by virtue of what's happened over the past 12 days with Donald Trump pulling Iran into talks about its nuclear program, only for Israel to begin a bombardment of Iranian strategic sites. And then a few days afterwards, calling for Iran to restart diplomatic talks and suggesting that it would have a 2-week window to do so, only to then bomb the 3 prominent nuclear facilities over the weekend. So there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of suspicion, and I think getting serious long-term talks started is going to be very difficult because there's a lack of trust on the Iranian side, with good reason, I would add. But then on the Israeli side and the American side, as you say, there's this long and complex history of relations with groups like Hezbollah, groups like Hamas, the Houthis, the Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, all of whom have launched violent attacks on Israel, on the United States, and contributed to a more precarious, unstable, and indeed violent region. So it is a worrying time.
Simon,
even though the conflict seems to have paused.
Sorry, Simon, I didn't mean to cut across you there. You're making a very good point, as always. What I was going to add is that I spoke with Iran's ambassador last week. I was invited to a special briefing for the press here in Paris, and we didn't learn a great deal. But what we did learn, of course, is something I suppose we knew: Iran will not surrender. And I'm wondering about this idea of regime change, which Trump says now he's not aiming towards. It's hard to believe that that's the truth, though, isn't it? Surely the United States, Israel are looking to have some kind of change in who is in charge in Iran.
Well, I think it's difficult to know. There's a lot about this whole situation that we just don't know. There's a lot of speculation, of course. There's speculation about what types of strikes would be undertaken on Iran, how Iran might respond, but also about the longer term strategic goals of both Israel and the United States. So there's been a sort of a hinting, an intimation of regime change from the US. Benjamin Netanyahu went on TV and said, well, regime change is a possibility, but it's not our direct strategic goal. But to even hint at that, to openly acknowledge it, kind of suggests that that was perhaps something that they were aspiring to in the longer term. And strategically, that sort of makes sense, that they feel threatened by Iran. And so if their threat perceptions are such that a nuclear Iran poses an existential threat, and all of these relations with transnational groups or quote unquote proxies pose a threat, then maybe in their eyes, a regime change is deemed the best way of ensuring security. But that is in breach of various clauses of international law, and it poses all manner of strategic, political, and diplomatic problems for the Middle East, for the United States, for the West, and for the rest of the world.
Simon, you told us just a few moments ago about drones over Iran. It's just popped in front of me now on the wire service. Iranian air defense is activated against drones in Tabriz. This coming from Iranian media reports. Simon, on the money as always. Russia's role. This is something I'd like to ask you about, because, you know, Iran's foreign minister, Araghchi, has been over to see Vladimir Putin. I mean, you know, face to face with the main man in Moscow, clearly seeking some kind of support. We didn't get any sense from what happened afterwards that that support was there. Russia's kind of strategic ambiguity. Russia, of course, has got its problems in Ukraine. It's trying to make up ground there. And, of course, that would compromise Trump in a funny way, wouldn't it, given his seeming friendship with Vladimir Putin?
Well, there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of uncertainty about Donald Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin and his engagement with Russia, his engagement with Ukraine. Of course, we saw that really fiery confrontation in the Oval Office between Trump and Vladimir Zelensky. So there's a lot of ambiguity, as you say there, a lot of confusion. And then adding Iran into the mix really does make it incredibly challenging to wade through the complexity. Because we know that Iran and Russia have been close. They're not necessarily allied and ideologically aligned, if you will. Russia had got a long history of engaging in Iran and violating Iranian sovereignty, dating back to the Second World War, and indeed long before that. So there's a degree of suspicion there, of course. And I think that there's also a bit of frustration that whilst Russia provided military support to the former president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, along with Iran, of course, Iran also provided support, Russia has not given the same level of military support to Iran, which might have helped to deter either Israeli attacks or indeed American attacks. And yet Iran has provided drones and other types of technology for Russia to use in Ukraine. So there's perhaps a bit of a military dynamic there, but I think perhaps the main reason that the official visit went to the Kremlin was to get diplomatic cover and to shore up that type of ballast on the world stage, if you will, because the spectre of Russia is still a powerful spectre, even if it is bogged down in a war in Ukraine.
Simon Mabon, always a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for the analysis which brings such light to what is a very complex situation facing us all here, emanating from the Middle East and obviously touching people all over the world. Simon Mabon, Professor of International Politics and Middle East Studies at Lancaster University. Simon, once again, thank you very much for joining us here in France 24.